Hello, and welcome to the Digital Workspace Works podcast. I'm Ryan Purvis, your host, supported by our producer Heather Bicknell. In this series, you'll hear stories and opinions from experts in the field, stories from the front lines, the problems they face and how they solved them, the areas they focused on from technology, people and processes, to the approaches they took that will help you to get to the grips with the digital workspace inner workings.
I quite enjoyed the article you sent me this morning about the Japanese corporate warriors rethinking their priorities. I think that's happening for a lot of people.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting to see because, and talking to former colleagues I've had who work out of Tokyo, it felt like the transformation around ways of working was slower to happen there, that, they have a different work culture, and that, remote work and all of that is very new and very different and very not the way that they did business. So I thought, seeing that change or start to change was super interesting.
Yeah, look, I haven't worked there, but I have worked with many people from there, and it is a different culture to the Western way that I'm comfortable with. And I think this pandemic, for all the bad things that have happened with it, has been good for many people and many reasons, to redefine why they work, how they work, and what they work with, tools-wise.
Yeah, and hopefully like what they are doing, I think it was a Gallup poll that they pointed out where only 4%, I think it was 4% of Japanese workers reported feeling engaged with their job, which seems to be a product of the expectation being, for the most part, that you join one company and you stay with them and you kind of move where they say you should move and kind of do what they say you should do. And it's kind of less self-driven, more like, loyalty and driven by the company you work for. But I thought that, 4% engaged was like an absurd number, honestly.
Yeah, sorry, I'm standing because my daughter's trying to sleep and I've got to keep rocking her in her pram.
I actually can't see you on video anymore, so you're good.
Oh, that's interesting because I can see me in video.
Oh, weird. Hope you're just a bubble.
Oh, okay. Bizarre. Well, let me turn my camera off then because it'll probably improve the bandwidth. Yeah, so it's interesting because that's almost like my parents' sort of generation were like that. I mean, my dad was with the same company 44 years, from apprentice all the way through to the day he left. He didn't go anywhere else. Okay, after that he went and consulted for a little bit. But if I compare my career and he and I have very different views on it. I mean, I will move, I'll say regularly, but 18 months to 3 years, 3.5 years is probably my longest stint somewhere, and that's just based on growth and opportunity, which is a very different mindset to the previous generations. And I remember talking with a Japanese work colleague about exactly that, about how from a tradition point of view and a specific word, I can't remember what it was, but basically if he had to move around, he would lose face for his family if he's working with a big brand, like if he was working for Sony or someone like that that's well known and he left them, that would have repercussions through the whole family. It wouldn't just be him moving. And I think that's starting to change, maybe, from what this article is saying. That they want one brand, but then they want to be able to do their own thing or find fulfillment in their career.
Yeah, it sounds like there's less judgment, or it's becoming more normal for people to move around a bit. I don't know how it is, if this is starting to go away in Japan, or what, if it's kind of the influence of more being self-driven and doing what you want to do and following your interests and passions, if that's kind of the driver. But at least, from my perspective in the US, and you're right, a lot of the previous generations would stick with, their employer their whole career or for a very large portion of it. But they had, pensions, they had things that were long-term incentives for them to stay with one company. They built up, they had a financial and security, safety net reason to stick with one company. And a lot of those bigger benefits have eroded, faded away, no longer are a thing. So your financial loyalty to one company is, it's less risky to change jobs because there's not as much that you haven't put all your eggs in one basket, so to say.
Well, and I think that's what digitalization has changed. But I mean, if you think about why that was the case, is because the only companies that could do a pension were the big ones, and typically those pensions were self-managed. Now, and I see this in South Africa and the UK, your pension can be with any third party, because the economies of scale are there now, that anyone can anyone with obviously meeting regulations and stuff can set up a pension fund, and you can contribute to it. In fact, it's law in the UK. If you work more than a certain amount of hours, you have to be in a pension. You have to have a pension scheme that you contribute to.
Oh, that's nice.
But you're not locked into the company one in most cases. So like when I worked for UBS, we had to use the UBS pension fund because all our fees were waived, or something to that effect. We had quite a preferential fee structure. And then the minute I left, that had to go to a third party straight away. And I say straight away, you got like 18 months to decide where it goes and all that kind of stuff. But it couldn't stay in the UBS fund, obviously because of that benefit on the fee structures. But now it's pretty common to like move your stuff around. There's no fees to move it per se. You're buying and selling index funds really. So there's a buy and sell cost. But like I've moved all my stuff to a provider who offers the best on fees and consolidated all my pension funds into that. And it's a completely digital experience. I log into a portal, I do the submissions electronically, I sign off the documents electronically, I submit them back. I did all this while in South Africa. Whereas a lot of these pension providers here are still old school in the sense that you have to write a letter, fill in a form, post it in, that sort of thing. Yeah. and I think that's what makes it appealing for me in some respects. The reason to stay in a company is because it's got good culture and there's growth opportunities, and you feel like you're aligned with everyone. The reason those benefits are there, and by law they have to be here in some cases. But I have freedom to choose because of digital tools, digital implementations.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting hearing your perspective, and I feel like the US is so behind in certain areas. Our health insurance is tied to employment, right? So every time you switch employers, you have to go through that and figure that whole thing out again. People certainly still do it. And, working in tech has definitely, I think, skewed my perception of what a tenure is because, a lot of people do move every 2 to 3 years. It's very common. So, but, that does come with some annoyances over here in terms of switching, pretty important parts of your life plan and safety net around. But that's just how it goes.
No, look, it's, I've worked in lots of small companies too, and those benefits don't always exist. So I remember when I first started my career, I worked for a company and they didn't cover medical. So you had to cover medical yourself. And if you're paying for medical directly, it's far more expensive than if you're doing it in a group. But the group's got to be a certain size. And if you're working in a startup, 10, 15 people, that's too small. So you need to be like the 30s, the 50s to get even the base level thing. So I can understand, a lot of that stuff. In a lot of ways, South Africa was quite far ahead on this. When I got to the UK, for example, what we had as private healthcare in South Africa as a scheme that you paid into, was quite advanced. And ironically, the scheme that I'm tied to here in the UK is actually a South African company, which is the one that I use in South Africa as well because of what they do. And that's a whole gamification thing. I think we've talked about it before, but in essence, if you do your fitness, you do your walking, you do all that stuff, you get benefits for being healthy, which ties back into your health insurance, which in theory means you claim less. So they've used some models to say that if you claim less, then obviously it doesn't cost the scheme anything, but they can give you an exchange. They'll pay for, like we get our shoes half price, we get our gym memberships half price. If you use a named gym, I get a free cup of coffee once a week. All that silly things, but they gamified it so well that all I do is check my app. You know me, I've got my different tracking devices. But I know that if I don't do that stuff, it's a silly thing. I'm losing out on my free cup of coffee, but I really know that I'm improving my health, which means I don't spend a lot of time going to doctors and all the rest of it. So healthcare becomes a really when you need it situation, as opposed to something that keeps you going. And again, digital tools.
Yeah, preventative is key. Maybe to flip this conversation on its head, and I don't have any research or data to kind of back this up or inform this, but I think it is interesting to think about the organization side of this equation and the perspective of a company. Because if you have employees who are moving around more frequently, kind of, doing 2 to 3 year stints with you, you kind of expect a certain level of churn, right? That becomes normal. What does that mean for knowledge transfer and like disruption within the organization? It's pretty costly to onboard and hire new employees. So I just think it's interesting to, like, what does that do to an organization over time to have, not infrequent turnover of staff? You can say that, anyone is really replaceable to an extent. You can always get someone to fill the role, but there's, knowledge and processes and everything that do change when you, or get lost when you lose people.
Well, that is a huge problem. So it's something, remember I did that burnout thing, and this is something that came up quite a lot, is staff retention, working with finding ways rather to keep staff coming in, and things like flexible working, remote working, those things were actually some of the key reasons for a person to come or go from a company. In some cases, more than who the boss was, because that used to be the old reason. People don't leave companies; they leave their bosses. And if I look at various scenarios that I've been involved in, one of those things has always been the choice. Being treated like an adult. So if you're able to do things because you think it's the most suitable, within reason and for the right reasons, ways of doing something, you get empowered to do that. That's usually what builds a good culture in an organization. Where it tends to go off the rails is when people are overly constrained, and that creates, what's the word? Resentment towards an org. And these are the things that are factors now for people coming into the market. I was interviewing some guys today. Every single one of them, the first question was, what's your policy on remote working? What's your policy on personal devices? What's your policy on working in different locations? Do I have to come to the office every day? That's the first kind of questions. And I don't think it's because people don't like to go and meet other people in the office. I think it's coming back to that freedom, choice, and saving time. I think, time and energy and fatigue, people become very aware of it and realizing that they do their best work when they're not tired. And I think that's a big factor too. I went all over the place on that one, but what do you think?
Yeah, I think the remote work part of it is hugely important to attracting and retaining certain staff in particular. Definitely skewing younger, but a lot of people have benefited from the flexibility and just see that it improves their lives overall. And so it's hard to, without a very good justification, right? Why would you give that up? I mean, I think a lot of people can understand the need to come together in person and meet people and maybe have collaboration moments, and that there's times that justify it. But for a lot of the work, a lot of the knowledge work that, because really what we're talking about here is people who are knowledge workers for the most part. That is, it still comes down to you're staring at a screen, you're working on digital files, you are having video calls. Like the nature of your work really doesn't change no matter where you're working from. So
sorry, I didn't actually. Sorry.
Oh, did you lose me again?
No, that's fine. I didn't tie in the other piece to what you were saying, which is the knowledge of the worker. So I think that comes down to realizing that anyone that comes in new, and this doesn't matter whether in the office or remote, is going to have a ramp up time, 0 to 3 months. Obviously, working together in an office, I think that can be accelerated. And I think there's a level of new joiners / young workers that are calling out to be in the office every day to get the knowledge. And then once they've got the knowledge, they can work remotely. Now, when IT walks out the door, especially when someone's been in the company for multiple years, two upwards, their institutional knowledge is quite high. And I don't think that value can always be articulated. But usually when they leave, it's what they don't know that they knew that walks out the door. That often is more important than what you knew they knew. So a salesperson that walks out the door, they know the product, they know some people. So that you can almost, in some senses, work a plan to do a handover and retrain someone. But the experience of selling to a customer 5 years ago, where they got a good relationship and all that stuff, and they can go back there again, that you can't always train for, that you can't replace easily. And it's a nature of business. I don't think you'll ever solve that problem per se, but it's good to try and avoid that problem if you can.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's the best answer, right? It's not great for companies, for employees to be moving around, and the more incentives and, the more they can improve their own culture to convince employees to stay for longer than that kind of 2 to 3 year mark, the better it will be for the organization. I think part of this too is, and I'm interested to see what changes here and if anything changes here, but, it's pretty common knowledge, I think particularly in tech, that if you want to have a higher salary, the best way to do that is to change jobs. Like the raise that you're getting on an annual basis doesn't come close to what you could get by switching companies a lot of the time. So I think that's something that organizations either need to solve for when it comes to really understanding where the job market is at and salary expectations, or just accept, some level of attrition because of that part of the equation, which is, obviously having a good culture and good benefits keeps people around and is an important part of that equation. But at a certain point, that's what it comes down to for a lot of people on why they decide to switch jobs.
Hey, look, we talked about this before. I've seen that often. I mean, we went through a stage, specifically in the Microsoft space, where when you got a booming product, like in those days, SharePoint was the booming product, and then with Dynamics, and guys would move between partners, and it's a small network. Everyone knows everyone in those places. and the developer would work 6 months on a project and then go to the next company, and they would take him or her because they were desperate for resources that had the knowledge, and pay them 10-20% more just to get them. And you see it a lot in India as well, where if you don't move quickly on a resource, you can lose them to another one because they're prepared to pay X amount more, or they've got a better reputation in the market. And I think that's almost the mercenary world we live in some respects. That is tech. And I was speaking to someone today about it, funny enough, and we were talking about him coming across to join us. And he said, well, look, I can't go until I finish off a few things because that's how I am. And I said, yeah, that's how you should be. But once you tell me that you're coming on X and X date, then you're locked in. Like, that's your time frame. I don't want to hear in X and X date -1 that you can't come because you haven't finished the stuff off. And at that point, it's not my problem anymore. But I hear you've got a reputation to protect. You've got to protect it because you're a consultant and you're only as good as your last job. So that's that's acceptable. That's the professionalism that should exist. And a guy like this or any other sort of go-to SMEs, they should follow a code of conduct like that, where they move around, but they move around providing good quality work, because that's what makes them valuable.
Yeah, I think when it comes back to the enjoying what you do and being driving your career based off of your interests and finding that satisfaction in it, right? It's not very satisfying to go to the organization, basically go through the onboarding period and leave. Like, you want to deliver some value, right? And make an impact. And I think when that's where it's tricky, right? If you come in and that's not part of it, like, what are you working for? Like, you're maybe being a very efficient way to get your paycheck for minimal effort, but like, is that satisfying? I guess at the end of the day, I think what I've realized changing companies is that I like to have institutional knowledge, not to hoard it, but like to become a subject matter expert, to be someone who is known to be someone you can come to with questions, relied on, that I enjoy having that as part of my role. And, I've been at my current company around 6 months. It's going to take, more time to get to where I was at my previous company, but in terms of being an expert, but that I find personally satisfaction from, feeling like I'm really providing something in that way. And that if I didn't invest in that, my career would feel hollow, or I don't know, just, less fulfilling, I think.
Yeah, but there's a certain comfort in being institutionalized, with a certain safety with that. And I mean, I think that's why a lot of people didn't leave their work during the pandemic, not only because they needed the job and whatever, but there was a certain, in a lot of uncertainty, there was comfort in knowing where you were and what you were doing every day. And the minute that the things started to open up and opportunities started presenting themselves, there was a whole bunch of people that, I don't really enjoy this company. There's other things out there. Let me move, and that became the sort of great resignation, the great reshift, or what do you want to call it? Which I can totally understand. I mean, as I said, I move, fairly regularly, which is not something I always want to do, but sometimes there's an opportunity that presents itself that is more suited to where I want to go and what I want to do. And part of the fun is starting in a new place and learning all the stuff and, being exposed to the change, because that's a thrill. Maybe it's the ADHD or something like that feed into that. But then there's also a level of, if I look at some, I still get phone calls for companies I've worked in, and they go, well, why did you do that? Or how can you help us with this? And there's a certain sense of satisfaction or fulfillment that you can still help someone with something you did 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Good point.
Cool. I do need to run. I'm going to sort my daughter out here. She's needs some water. Good to catch up.
All right. You too. Thanks, Ryan.
Cheers. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Heather Bicknell is our producer and editor. Thank you, Heather, for your hard work on this episode. Please subscribe to the series and rate us on iTunes or the Google Play Store. Follow us on Twitter @the DWW Podcast. The show notes and transcripts will be available on the website www.digitalworkspace.works. Please also visit our website www.digitalworkspace.works and subscribe to our newsletter. And lastly, if you found this episode useful, please share with your friends or colleagues.